expert, physician, researcher, and academic, former Medical Association president. Doctor, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yours, and thank you for having me.
All right, is the choice of shirt, the color, something for us to take home or to converse about?
This shirt, yes, it is.
All right, next to the doctor is Alana Kembabazi, the Program Manager, Right to Health, ISER. Thank you so much for joining us, Alana.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be back.
All right, I know you were here this morning to speak on the same, but in light of the address now being given, I'm sure that you'll have some important insights to share with us. And finally on our panel, we have Paul Lakuma, who is a research fellow, Economic Policy Research Center. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul.
Good evening, viewers, and nice to have you.
All right. Well, I'm hoping we'll all speak a bit louder because I'm a bit far off, so I need to be able to hear you. Just to get your thoughts, a sense of when you were listening to what the president was saying in his State of the Nation address, what were you thinking? Were there any surprises? I'll start with you, Dr. Cook.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just for starters, the color of this shirt, by the way, is reflected in the flag of Uganda. So any other...
We'll take that.
Yeah, like MTN, also MTN has it. Anyway, I think the president made a very important speech. He made important remarks. I wanted to hear more things. I didn't. Maybe they'll come in the budget speech. The president was saying health is wealth. That's what he said. Because he talked about the priority of priorities in terms of the real economy. And I'll just give you a picture, a mental picture, that if you look at how Uganda is ranked globally, we are a low-income country by the World Bank. We are also what we call a fragile state. In fact, we are in the bottom 20% when it comes to fragile states. These are states which they look at the ability to control the territory, the ability to provide public services, and many other things. Now, I'll stick to public services. Imagine we are number 158 out of 178. But when you look at page 2 of the new vision, Uganda has registered only 500 cases of coronavirus and no death. For me, this is the surprise that in some instances, even if we are ranked low, we are outperforming ourselves in terms of this corona idea. No death. Actually, I'm surprised that even Rwanda and so on and other neighbors have some deaths. And for me, I perceived the president as a very proud, confident, COVID-19 war president. And we pray, obviously, that whatever is happening that is protecting us from the pandemic is going on. Very happy that the pandemic has been an eye-opener. We have been talking about a resilient health system, and the president is talking the same language which he wasn't talking 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Manufacturing products here and so on and so forth.
Well, you started off with his thoughts on the health, and he seems really confident, like you said, about the health of the nation. Is this justified?
Well, it depends on the parameters you are looking at. If we are talking about coronavirus, where we have thrown all our resources, he is justified. But it would be important for the president to also bring about information around what about other diseases. You know, how healthy are we regarding access to maternal and child health care, reproductive health, you know, contraception and so on. Utilization, by the way, of services has gone down. So we can expect that some things are not going on well, and we need to cover those blind spots. And I thought the State of the Nation address would say, okay, we put all our eyes on corona, maybe we didn't do so well in these other things. There are benefits, of course. Family bonding, less crime, border accidents, not there. Because border accidents were competing with the...
In the same space, when you speak about family bonding, we, of course, also look at domestic violence.
Yes,
the
that's what I was coming to that. That as but probably there is more benefit in the bonding than there has been the violence. We just need to distill that data and see that. So I expect the president to really chip into that, look at it, and also talk about, you know, the health sector has also lost economically in terms of private for-profit, as we call them, service delivery people closing. They have halved the number of nurses or doctors. The volumes are not as high. Jobs have been lost in the private sector as well, in terms of health service delivery.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Buku. Emma?
Paul, this is specifically to you. The president addressed a number of issues in regard to reviving the economy, especially sectors that have been battered by COVID. My interest is on the question of import substitution. Even before COVID, we've had a number of we've had a number of attempts, for instance, through Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. What is going to sustain import substitution besides making masks and things of that sort?
I mean,
Thank you. The president talked about the curtailment of the supply chain to Uganda. Of course, something which we did not expect. I remember we depend a lot on China for imports and other countries for imports, but now those countries are also on lockdown. So we have to survive using any other way. And that's why he said that COVID-19 provides an opportunity for import substitution. But we have to start from somewhere, and we have to start with the essentials which are needed right now. And those are the PPEs, the mask, and the sanitizer factories. And then build from there. And again, he noted in the beginning of his speech, when he started mapping a speech from his revolutionary days, the 10 points program, he noted point number 5, 9, and 10. 5 being building a strong integrated economy, 9 being cooperation with Africa, and 10 a mixed economy. Mixed meaning both private and public. And we can start building from there. And when it comes to integration, he talked about integrating agriculture to industry, integrating mineral to industry, vertically integrating industries, especially the mineral ones, from iron ore to other products, refining minerals. He talked about how we started with refining gold, and also some form of protection. He talked about protecting uranium, which belongs to Uganda, given our strategic energy needs in the future. And he said the politics of energy and the economics of energy will change when renewable energy becomes cheaper, because we are now the fad right now is renewable energy. By renewable energy, especially the initial capital, is not cheap. It's very expensive. Until that becomes cheap, then we can think about exporting uranium, and he gave the strategic direction which the energy sector needs to take. So I think he built a very strong foundation in his speech of how we can begin the import substitution. He also gave the fiscal framework which underlies that strategy, and some of them are the tax breaks and the arrears, payment of arrears, payment of VAT arrears, and waiver of payee for specific sectors, not for all sectors, but for specific sectors, and of course, social protection of the vulnerable people. Thank you.
I think we're going to get a little deeper into the measures that he shared towards the end, but when you speak about import substitution and the things he spoke about were medicines, textiles, industrial sugar, paper, packaging materials, glass products, bicycles, and even cars, and I'm wondering how feasible that is. Are we currently making cars, or are we putting together the spare parts or whatever from? Are we able to do these things, and how quickly? And if we are, why have we waited for this moment?
Well, this moment was an eye-opener, as I said earlier, that we don't have the supply chain which we used to have. And when you have a supply chain, it creates a comfort zone. Now we don't have that comfort zone. We have to create something for ourselves. So right now we are not making cars, we are making concept cars with Kira Motors, but you have to begin from somewhere. We may make cars in 25 years from now or 20 years from now, but we have to begin from somewhere, and that's what we are doing. But if you noted in his speech, when he built the dichotomy of the real economy and the vulnerable economy, after that he spoke about why the lockdown worked. And if you go deeper into why the lockdown worked, you will know why we are capable of doing import substitution. And he gave the points why the lockdown worked. 1, security. 2, energy. 3, roads. 4, a resilient health sector. Having that base. And 5, and most importantly, the agricultural sector. Having that base, having food for the factory workers, having food for the country, being secure in terms of food, having the roads, having the enough energy, provides you with the base you need to do import substitution. We may not have everything in place right now, but we have the base. We have the roads, we have the security, we have the energy, and we have the health sector, and we have the food. So we have the base to begin with to do import substitution.
Emma,
just my last one on,
Okay.
On that.
Yeah.
Import substitution requires that there's value addition.
Yes.
And it requires that the bottleneck of trade barriers is eliminated. I'll give you an example. The president talked about dairy products, and there's lots of evidence to show that it's one of the industries that has grown by leaps and bounds. But before even we got into the COVID problem, you recall Kenya was blocking our dairy products. We seem to have some kind of stalemate within the East African community, and we need to protect first and foremost those regional markets, even when we think about the question of import substitution and the ability for us to be able to, increase our exports. For instance, we have the DRC, which could bring on board a market of 87 million people. And we've not had the East African Heads of States Summit sit as a result of the border conflict between Rwanda and Uganda. How can we ensure that we protect the little that we have? How can we ensure that we add value to our products in this regard?
Yeah, going back to the president's speech again, point number 9, at the beginning of his speech, at the preamble of his speech, when he was trying to map out the points in his speech, he pointed out point number 9 of the 10 points program. And that point was African cooperation with African countries. And I think the diplomacy and the politics of the region are going to change going forward. Of course, nations conflict, just like anybody, just like individuals and partners conflict. But we need to up our game when it comes to diplomacy. Make sure we consolidate on the gains we have made, but also work on the weaknesses we have in the region, so that we can have, first of all, security in the region, and then we can talk about business in the region. So I don't see any problems going forward. I see only opportunities going forward.
Well, one of the things that the president spoke about was we had only 2 factories making sanitizers. Now we have 107 factories. Factories are expanding. Masks, we have mask making factories and so on and so forth. If we look into the future, for how long shall we masks and sanitizers? Is it sustainable?
Yeah, first of all, I need to correct. I think the 107 was not for sanitizer, was for PPEs. PPEs, I think, and then 10
for sanitizers.
Sanitizers?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. First of all, you have to deal with the emergency and the opportunity provided by the emergency. So we had to re-engineer. Even the factories making PPEs and sanitizers and masks are not originally built for that. They were just re-engineered to respond to the crisis. I think that's also possible. The reverse engineering of that is possible going forward to do something else which is marketable in the future. But for now, this is what is demanded by the market, and it looks more viable and a right choice to make as a factory. Also, re-engineering these factories is not easy. Like I'm told, Kira Motors was trying to re-engineer its plant to start making ventilators. It's not easy to do this even in developed countries like China and the US and other countries, but we have succeeded to some extent. And I think reversing that, the reverse engineering of that, it's not that hard if you can do it going forward, and you can go backwards also.
All right. Alana, I want to get your thoughts on what the president, what's the State of the Nation address that he gave about a couple of minutes ago. And in giving those statements, I would also like you to speak about social protection. I know the president only hinted at it when it came to food. So I'm thinking it's a lot bigger than that, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are in general on social protection.
Yeah. I think maybe unlike my neighbors, I am a lot more disappointed. Today morning I said we were hoping for a state of a changed nation. Today is the day that so many Ugandans got up. If you're coming from Entebbe, you had to think about how you're going to get 16,000 shillings to go and come back without even...
Alana, do you want to be a bit louder, because the mask is also masking a bit of
without even being sure that you'd be able to like earn something. And we're coming out of this lockdown, and before the lockdown, we were 1 in 5 Ugandans who are extremely poor. The numbers that have gotten up, right? And it's undisputable. It's happening worldwide, but it's especially happening here. And we really just wanted to see that he could give us, you know, a concrete plan on measures that are going to affect the lives of ordinary Ugandans. Like you said, he began to hint at social protection, so he's talked about food going on, but food hasn't reached everywhere, and I don't even know that that's what people say they need. For example, persons with disabilities have often been left out. Nudipu right now is the one going out and giving food to vulnerable persons with disabilities. He talks about the the boda people and the saloon operators being able to get sort of low, you know, just affordable capital of sorts. It's not quite clear. You can see from how he drafted that it's still like a vague idea, which they're consulting, operation wealth creation. People needed something more concrete. We are more than 2 months into this lockdown, and we have known from the moment COVID hit, we knew that certain professions are going to have a really hard time coming back up, and you wanted to think about a package that could actually ameliorate that, right? And when you think about it, you know, my neighbor is right. In a lot of ways, he's focused on stimulating supply, right? We'll have more factories, we'll do this. But you have people to stimulate demand, and demand comes from people being able to have some money in their pocket, right? And I think social protection programs, beyond being a basic human rights thing, having these safety nets is also good for the economy. The World Bank, IMF, they all acknowledge this. We were hoping we would see something that is more concerted. I thought he would come today and say, you know what, we've often ignored this particular aspect, but COVID has revealed the importance of that. Nowhere did he say that, right? You can still say he still has the same mindset where he says, but we don't want people to be dependent, as though people just voluntarily want to be the recipients of this. And social protection in Uganda has been a controversial issue. When you talk about it, you talk about NUSAF, or you talk about SAGE, very few programs here and there. He talked about, I think, did you talk about youth empowerment? I have to remember. They're often underfinanced, donors threaten to pull out, they're not sustainable. For a program, you know, like SAGE, if it had been, for example, significantly expanded, SAGE is how people are able to pay for healthcare, contribute to households. It actually gets back into the economy. I thought he would talk about, and social protection, I want to underscore for anyone out there listening, is supposed to be holistic, right? So it also includes education, it includes health. He was silent about education. In fact, education is in crisis in this country right now because, you know, the learners, depending on where you are, you have not been learning at all, given how convoluted and disorganized the distribution of learning materials has been. Then you're saying finalists are going to start, then they don't start, then the private schools are saying we cannot handle these measures. There are lots of, and even the staff like the lecturers and so forth, who are now just being told, well, we don't know when things will come back to normal. So now you also have highly educated people that are going to get unemployed. So I thought he would talk about that. I was shocked by the omission of that. And when it came to health, he talks, you know, he gives platitudes, you know, saying, when I had him say, well, I attribute it also to health. For example, he said the scientists should be paid more. And I'm thinking health workers need better pay. They've been asking. They're actually threatening to lay down their tools. over things like pay, protective, basic protective equipment, things we have always known that he doesn't take, I know the budget is coming up next week and maybe, these sort of discussions he just thinks will be thrown under that category. But it was really important for him to say, listen, in the midst of this pandemic, as State of the Nation address in the midst of the pandemic, these are the lessons we've learned. And we've learned that whatever we do has to affect the ordinary Ugandans. It has to actually transform their lives. And I'm wondering for the person right now, the person, like I said, who has had to spend 16K to board just to come to Kampala from Entebbe and go back, what is their takeaway from this? How is this really going to impact their lives in a significant way? And the other mission was, of course, around the legislative agenda. Usually in the State of the Nation, they say the bills that are being passed. It was a good time to talk about national health insurance, because that is definitely a way, in a form of social protection, but also a health financing mechanism. And to say, you know what, we are actually going to look into this. Remember, he had said they should withdraw it. But he should have been saying, we are going to make sure we have something like this that will cover the poor and the vulnerable, because we've learned lessons from this. We could have seen minimum wage. Remember, the minimum wage bill was sent to him for assent. He hasn't, he's just kind of left it there, right? So being able to see some of these things on the legislative agenda is important. I think even legislation around food. And on the food issue, beyond distributing, he boasts about the fact that the people in the villages he has called tell him they all have food is not a problem. I think that depends on which villages you're calling. If you're calling the West, yes. But I was in Busoga at the end of last year where there was actually food insecurity. The North has always had food insecurity. What is happening right now? And when you talk about supporting agriculture and so forth, how much of that is going to get back to the ordinary Ugandans, right? Whether it's subsistence farmers, because you do need them, you do need to have subsistence farming. Beyond sort of supplying food to everyone, you need to be able to make sure people can actually grow food in particularly hard-to-reach areas like Amudat and so forth, like what's happening there. So I think it was a stopgap measure, but the challenge is we've been having stopgap measures. He has addressed us so many times on the COVID response, so he's been giving us stopgap measures. So I thought by now, Cabinet and him would have sat and said, you know what, this is the plan, and this is really pivotal because we are also transitioning into NDP 3. An NDP that was written before this pandemic hit. An NDP which still showed that financing to these social sectors will be left to the private sector. An NDP that still said, you know what, we are going to prioritize, like he's always said, manufacturing and all of that without actually questioning about the trickle-down effects on this. And so we expected a bit more. And finally, all of the things that we need him to do, particularly around social protection, would require financing. And so I wanted to hear about accountability, right? So many Ugandans are wondering, there's been so much money thrown at you, whether it's loans or donations or so forth, like, how are you guys spending the money and are you going to strengthen your accountability, right? And that was a theme from the previous State of the Nation that he didn't say. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is that money saved could go again towards measures like social protection. A discussion about curbing illicit financial flows. If you notice in the State of the Nation, he hits at the Financial Intelligence Authority for investigating one of the factories and says, they have just seen it. But part of what we have been seeing is a lot of money is lost through illicit financial flows. And in the discussions we've been having of recent around social protection, we're almost made to look like we're idealists. Like, where will the money come from? Well, let's have, so I thought the State of the Nation would say, on the one hand, we're going to stimulate, supply, we're going to stimulate demand, we're going to really make sure we're taking care of Ugandans, and we are going to try and make sure that we are curbing the flows, such that we can have the money to do so, such that we can prevent inflation, such that people can have the confidence that he says, and he hasn't. And when you saw a lot of repetition from I actually think the State of the Nation basically was pulled together from those different papers he talked about, because I have read them, the whole, there's the productive, he's had these papers over time that he's written, and it's great, but so many Ugandans needed to hear more. They needed to hear you're going to take care of them.
Like you, Emmanuel, here had quite a number of expectations of the address. And
Thank you, Alana. And I agree with you entirely that perhaps the granular detail lacked. But to Dr. Buku, The lockdown was supposed to create some kind of opportunity, breathing space for the government to be able to put in place measures, referral hospitals, the ICU beds, the ventilators, and we're still talking about, the president is still talking about the issue in regard to paying a better salary to scientists. What, in your view, what's your assessment in regard to the ability to stock up during the lockdown? Are we really ready now that we have our numbers, spiking?
Yeah, thank you very much, Emmanuel. I really concur with the previous speakers, especially my neighbor here. She really hit on the point. In fact, I was cancelling my point. She has said this one, she has said this one. The issue of the lockdown, really, he mentioned that, the president said the lockdown has worked. And we have to be very careful when we make this assessment.
Yeah.
Has the lockdown worked? On what parameters? The lockdown has worked in terms of curtailing the COVID-19 pandemic. But every policy intervention has policy problems. And we should not remove our eyes from the other policy problems. Research from a group of scientists, it's unfortunate that I always have to quote Europeans. I would have loved to quote the Economic Policy Research Center, but Imperial College London, imperialist. So they are saying that the knock-on effects of the lockdown, which many African countries employed for 21 days, at least 38 did it very, very fast. Cut down COVID, we have less than 2% of the global burden of COVID, yet we have 16% of the population and 7% of the GDP. So you can see that we really don't have our share of COVID yet. Maybe we are early on in the epidemic. Still, TB, malaria, and HIV, the big three, ATM, AIDS, TB, malaria, are probably experiencing problems we are not seeing. And we need to address those problems today. Otherwise, we'll see the effects later. When we do the financial year, when you do your audit reports of any company to say whether it's a going concern, usually at the end of the year. When we do that audit in the annual health sector performance report, and the Ministry of Health is honest about it, that's when we'll know whether by saving these people from COVID, we didn't kill a number, who are unable to access services. I really wanted to address that question which Emmanuel asked, very important question. So what? Why did we lock down? And then the other part of Bioya Bianswa. The president has been threatening to increase salaries. But I can tell you today, a salary is not going to save you. That's why we thought twice as the medical association and said, no, don't strike for salaries. We can strike to save our lives first. Because you have to be alive to enjoy that salary anyway. And what would it look like if we go on strike when other Ugandans are lacking food? So we went down to our mission and said, let's save lives. Unfortunately, our lives are on the line. And that's where we are disappointed with the government. That no health worker should get this COVID while on duty, at least, at the very least. Yes, you are sharing the cake in parliament and so on. That's all right. Just make sure that we don't get sick. I can tell you as we speak today, healthcare professionals on the front line don't have masks. And you will see government officials putting on N95 respirators with face shields. What a contradiction. They don't need them. They're in air-conditioned places. So this kind of thing needs to be addressed. And in many ways, she spoke to the fragile state index, which also looks at number 3, corruption and criminality. Possibly criminality has gone down, possibly. But corruption seems to have thrived with COVID. They are friends. There has been a cash cow. Deals here and there, here and there. Okay? And it has also permeated to the health sector. I will tell you something. Yes, I've just seen a recent publication supporting the use of masks. Isn't it? That's not a problem. Research is all right. But implementation has to be negotiated depending on the context. The Ministry of Health already is in the process of procuring masks to the tune of $35 billion, $10 million. For the community, by the way. 7 billion shillings, $2 million, is going to be used to spend, to distribute the masks. Can you imagine? And here at the front line, those who are fighting don't have bullets, don't have bulletproof, don't have anything. And they are crying to us. Of course, they're employed by government. So they can't come here and talk. But they call you and say, "Book, if you're going on, please mention this." Soroti, working without linen. You know linen? Linen is that green cloth which creates a sterile environment. NITIL should be producing linen, not masks, for the community. In Kawempe, 22 women were not operated last week, but one. No, last week actually. Because the doctor said, "Appa, we cannot go there without tools." So I think we need to link these beautiful figures to the facts on the ground. And I'm sure the economists will agree with me that there is the economy of GDP and there is the economy of going to the village and you see people actually don't have food. So those two need to speak to each other, same as the health sector. That what the president is proposing in terms of these things. By the way, what happened to manufacture of ventilators? It was very hip. We were supposed to have had a prototype by the end of this. But that discussion is lost.
Paul touched on the ventilators. I don't know if he wants to speak more about that and keep us update us on what's happening.
I don't know if the doctor had exhausted his point.
I was passing it on to you.
Okay.
By starting with the manufacturing.
Well, what I want to say, what my colleagues have said, it's valid, but we must also look at the context. And we are a developing country, and how much money do we have? And I think the president put it clearly when he started his speech. He pointed out point number 10 in the 10 points program, a mixed economy, which is going to be public and private. So I think it's a shared responsibility between the public sector and the private sector. It's absurd to think about a welfare state in Africa, given the little resources we have. So that's why we have to invite partners, development partners and the private sector, to help us fill the gaps which exist in provision of service, which includes social protection. Actually, social protection is enshrined in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. But some of the things enshrined there, the rights enshrined there, some of them are not possible, not to be implemented in a country of $30 billion, a country with an output of $30 billion. So we must know what can be done now and what can be done tomorrow, given the size of the cake. We first need to build the cake, to bake the cake, a bigger cake, and know how to share it. When it comes to social protection, I think the president he did point out suspension of payment of payee. I think that is also social protection. It doesn't have to be always transfers. It can be suspension of payment of taxation. That's a form of social protection for some people in certain sectors. Suspension of contribution to NSSF. That's part of the fiscal packages.
There's
that's
been a
also
big
social
question
protection
about NSSF in the last couple of weeks, and whether or not we should get midterm payments to carry us through this period. I don't know if you want to touch on that as well.
That's another issue altogether. I'm speaking about the contribution, the monthly contribution, the 5 and the 10% from the employee. That was suspended.
But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Yes, Alana?
I would like to chime in on this though, because, there are two things that you say that I completely disagree with. One is the idea that, yes, we'll have this thing in the Bill of Rights, but we'll progressively get there. We just don't have enough money. We just shut down the country and did things we did not think were imaginable, right? And the idea that we don't have enough money, again, is a big question mark because, like I said, there are a lot of flaws. There are a lot of accountability issues. And he should have started off by telling us, this is how much money we have from the loans, from what we got, and this is what, and the budget, and this is what we're able to do. But getting back to
interrupt you, perhaps, are you suggesting that we should pay more attention to things like the classified expenditure that was passed by Parliament? Why should we have a classified expenditure at the time of COVID? Do we have a threat from a neighboring country?
Yeah, exactly. I think for me it's really a question of prioritization. And like I said, this is a moment where you've said, Usually, so people can, you know, you're against a welfare state, but you're at a point where things are not functioning as they used to, or what we had was broken, but this is even more broken, and people can't take care of themselves, and that is the role of the state. And so what do you prioritize at this moment, right? And that's where the question you have around some of the classified expenditures and how money is being spent are really issues of prioritization. And Josephine, you're asking about NSSF, and again, people think, okay, social protection, NSSF. I mean, how many people would be able, even if we're allowed to access, how many people would benefit from that, right? First of all, you leave out the informal sector, which is over 80%, and within the informal sector, over 90% are youth. So you just have this group which really I think needs it and has been less resilient to the shocks, completely left out, and then a very small percentage. And that's what I've been trying to say, that any idea at social protection has almost just been like dipping our fingers in the butter, and that's it. We have not really thought it important to think about the people that compromise the majority of Ugandans, the ones who need it the most, the informal sector, the persons with disabilities, the older persons. Like, we have never really committed to that, and we've had a country that has kept telling us there is no money, there is no money, there is no money. And the same thing when it comes to health. Even in this period, and I want to challenge when you were saying we didn't have COVID deaths, because we had so many deaths in health because of COVID. For people who lived in areas like Sigulu in the islands, who could not get to the nearest facility, which is on a different island, because there is no water ambulance, they don't have a health facility on their island, they were deaf, they were stranded. We get these reports all the time from the community. And in this moment, when we should be prioritizing, again, the well-being of people, thinking social protection holistically, that includes health, education, that includes even cash transfers, we are still stuck in this sort of older way of thinking. And I want to get back to the fact that actually it is very much part of our African culture to take care of each other. So for him as a Pan-Africanist, and he likes to make fun of things and say these ones are neoliberals, these people are fighting. Remember, if you remember, the beginning of the speech was almost like people were fighting against him, because point number 6 of his 10-point program is really around social, economic, right? And he was acting like we would have more progress if people were not fighting. But you have to set the tone, and the tone has to be seen in this speech. And so for me, I just don't buy into the argument that this is something that is not going to be done. I think at most, if you say it's not going to be, if you think it can't be done, then call for participation. Ask people, this is where we are stuck. How can we make it happen? For example, why are you going around to distribute food instead of cash transfers, right? Like you say, there's there's all the scandals around the food. Was it good quality? The people who have to test it, the ones who have to distribute the fuel, you know?
All right,
so
Alana, we're fast running out of time, but just as we close, I know we've not spoken about, and Paul had started to speak about the interventions that the president mentioned. If we could all just briefly speak about those as we close, and I'll start with you, Paul, so that you can finish what you were saying, and then we'll just go around in closing.
Well, yes, I'll start by saying when we are proposing some of these policy measures and what should be the normative, we should speak in the context of the country we are living in, and the region we are living in, and the resources we have. That said, some of the fiscal measures he has mentioned is VAT, payment of VAT arrears. That would help businesses. There are a lot of, about 2 trillion stuck with the Uganda Revenue Authority. That needs to be processed so that businesses can move over. There's a payment of arrears, not VAT arrears, but arrears. Government receives supplies from the private sector. Supplies in rent, supplies. The government also has arrears in salaries, arrears in pension, and arrears in wages of the staff. That needs to be paid to stimulate the demand my colleague was talking about earlier. He mentioned it, and those are also forms of social protection. You just need to look at it positively, and that's why in Africa we need to also start building on our strength than always looking at the weaknesses of a system. Look at the strength of a system and the measures the president had mentioned. Some of them are not direct social protection, but in context, it is social protection. He spoke about rent. That landlords are not allowed to chase people. What is that? Is that not social protection? In a way, it is.
How practical is
Because we've
Thank you.
actually had on the ground
Yeah.
people, you know, getting harassed by their landlords, and
It's
most of the
happening.
people we spoke to earlier, so there don't seem to be actual measures you can touch, you know, and say,
No, there's a suasion from the president. Like when he made a statement that the telecommunication companies need to come in to chip in and provide help during COVID-19. We saw MTN, the Airtels of this world, chop tariffs. They were not obligated to do it, but given that it came from the president, they did it. Sometimes some of these things don't need policies. It's just a matter of suasion, moral suasion. Thank you.
all right, Alana?
Yeah, I wanted to really hint at something you said. You know, you talked about, for example, saying they cannot evict tenants. I have a friend who was actually evicted this week. If you're not addressing the landlords by actually thinking through how they're going to get some money, and, you know, either like, or pass something that is more solid than you, just sort of saying it wishy-washy, it is not really sort of happening on the ground. But looking at some of the things he said, for example, he decides they're going to defer pay-as-you-earn. They could decide to reduce pay-as-you-earn. We're going to be living with COVID for a while, and the effects of COVID for a while. Pay-as-you-earn has always been a sticky thing, right? So just deferring the payments means you still have to pay. I disagree with him when he says, for example, he said they are going to pay, government is going to pay what it owes. If you pay me what you owe me, are you really providing for me a social safety net? So I think we need to be sort of a bit more critical about this. I did think, you know, sort of capitalizing UDB, of course, I mean the UDC, and also the stuff you said earlier on about UDB, I think those are great. But you have to, like, there has to be, again, a bit more information. Like I said, for me, my rubric is, for the person who used to sell second-hand clothes, or the border riders, or salon lady, how is this going to play out practically, you know, in them getting access to these funds that could cushion them for a bit? And I think that's the part that was, you know, maybe we will see, maybe he will elaborate upon it later on, because it was a long, there were just a lot of things that he was trying to do. I did like that he said support to water and electricity utilities, but that is assuming that people have, like, piped water, right? So you're, on the one hand, you're trying to cushion those who do, and I'm wondering what it means for me as a payer of national water. Am I not going to have to pay if I can't? Are you going to just give them some money to defer later? There are many questions there. But unlike the last State of the Nation, he actually said his target was really to expand access to water, even around borehole points, right? Because there's so many parts of the country, and I'm trying to figure out the actual data. He said there were only 65,000 boreholes in Uganda, and it was like a problem, and he was trying to make sure there was one water source per village. Borehole or piped water was something. That is not, it's completely lost. So last year he was better in this aspect than this year, because this year he's just talking about that. I would say that all of his measures, you know, we've been shouting and clamoring about them for a while. So it's good to see that some of them are getting there, but again, there's just no sort of detail, right? And there's a huge question for me on whether or not the person that needs them will be able to access that. It's not enough for you to say, okay, I'm going to cushion sort of like the medium, sort of higher income classes, right? You have to get those who are already very vulnerable into slipping back into poverty. That is the category you really have to focus on, in my opinion. So I'm really struggling.
Thank you, Alana. Perhaps these are some of the things he'll address in the next, not the next set of the nation address, but the next address in regards to COVID-19 address. Yeah. Dr. Oboku, very quickly.
Very difficult to make concluding remarks after these excellent submissions, but I just wanted to finish my point that the burden of COVID-19 in Uganda does not warrant investing 42 billion on masks to the community of cloth. The other point is to really concur with her that yes, no COVID case fatality in Uganda, but mortality due to the effects of locking down the country and movement could have impacted on the killer diseases. Now, moving forward, COVID, by the way, is going to come here.
Yeah.
We have been postponing the coming,
It's not here.
but it's going to come. So we must make sure our treatment facilities are resilient. We may be lucky, but as he said also, lockdown cannot continue forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the resilience is not in this partaking of the national cake, but actually investing in these hospitals, in those things that are going to strengthen our ability to handle actual COVID sick patients. Moving forward, what I wanted to hear, or I want him to address, is employment. I'm telling you, there are many young doctors out there who have no jobs, who have lost jobs in the private sector. COVID-19 has told us that there is market failure. And in terms of social services, governments must come back. More government. Look at the US, they were crying. They had forgotten to handle basics in health. Yet theirs is the most expensive health system, but many people cannot access care. So employment for the youth. Doctors. They employed some in Kabale, by the way, where I come from. And they didn't pay them. They didn't give them accommodation. And these are COVID-19 doctors. They have to address that inequity. How come parliamentarians can withdraw money very fast? But the ones who are paying doctors who are employed, they tell you, you know, public service and all this kind of thing. Investment in health. I read in the newspaper, I think, 2.8 trillion budgeted for health and 5.8 trillion for roads. Apana. We already have excess electricity. Please, health is wealth, and my government must invest now directly into health. This national ambulance system, it could have helped transporting people, and we don't need to buy ambulance systems. They are already all over the place, including MPs give ambulances. So can we have a coordinated mechanism of bringing this in the same pool? And then finally, obviously, my pet subject. I think Mr. Museveni needs to finally, in this budget, pay doctors and scientists that money is always talking about. If it is there. If it is there somewhere, because we see it with other people, but somehow it does not reach healthcare professionals. We are not very good at lobbying. We are busy in theater, saving lives. So we cannot argue all the time. He has mentioned it, he has seen it, everybody has seen it. I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of others, but if money is there and you are dividing it, please, doctors still have pockets and bank accounts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mpuku. I know, Emma, you've been itching to speak about debt or to ask them a question, but our time is fast spent, but I'll let you wrap us up.
Just quickly to wrap it up, I think for me the other very important question is the question of borrowing and debt. And to be very specific, during the lockdown, we borrowed money from the IMF. I think it's very important to ensure that each penny is accounted for, but more, the president also spoke about the neo-colonial footprint in Africa. And many times we turn a blind eye to China and its hegemonic interests on the continent. Now is the time. If China is really our friend, we know we borrowed heavily, for instance, in the oil and gas sector, and hedged our bets that we'll have commercial production. Now is the time. Just like some years ago, under the highly and poorly indebted countries, HIPC were forgiven, debt was forgiven for poor countries, including Uganda. We make this impassioned plea to China, if China is really our friend, to waive the debt that we have with them. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Emma Mtaizu. I think you're asking for too much, but all right, we'll take that in good faith. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul Akuma, Alana Kembabazi, and Dr. Mpuku Okwari. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And that brings us to the end of our live coverage of the State of the Nation address. Keep it NTV for more quality programming.